Hey friends, welcome to one of our weekly Rev-Ups. It was just a few weeks ago that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers won the Super Bowl against the Kansas City Chiefs. And while those of us in the Tampa Bay area, we were celebrating, much of the country was kind of in shock because most everybody expected the Chiefs to win. But the very next day, the main message on ESPN and sports talk radio and all the shows and podcasts was that after that Super Bowl, there was no doubt that Tom Brady, the quarterback of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, had cemented himself as the GOAT. In other words, he was the greatest of all time. And their reasoning was not only had he won Super Bowls with two different teams, but he had won 7 Super Bowls. In fact, Tom Brady has more Super Bowl rings than any NFL team in the history of the NFL. And so the very next day after the Super Bowl, the main message across all the media was that Tom Brady had secured himself as the GOAT of the NFL. Now, let me ask you this morning, how exactly do you determine who is a GOAT? In other words, in your sport, in your job, in your career, in your social group, how do you determine who is greater than everybody else? One of the prevailing messages in our culture today is that if you want to be the greatest, then you got to find a way to get to the top. Sometimes that means hard work and determination. Sometimes that means cheating and cutting corners. Sometimes that means ignoring your friends and your family or whatever is standing in the way of your goal. In other words, our culture teaches us that it doesn't really matter how you get to the top, but rather that you get to the top. You see, ever since the very beginning of creation, you and I as human beings, we have struggled with this deep inner desire to become great. Now, we may not like to talk about it, we may not like to admit it, but the reality is that it's there. Every single day, you and I are constantly comparing ourselves to one another. Who's the greater runner? Who's the greater singer? Who's the greater friend? Who's the greater parent? And friends, you know what happens when we do this, right? When we compare ourselves to other people, oftentimes we end up getting angry and jealous and bitter and frustrated because deep down, we desire to be the greatest. Not him, not her, not them, me. But let me ask you, is being the GOAT really what it's all about? In other words, should you and I be spending our lives trying to become the greatest? At the end of the day, it all depends on how you define greatness. In fact, Jesus, he had a very different definition of what it means to be great. Take a look at what he told his disciples. He says, "Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all." Now, notice that Jesus didn't say that you shouldn't aspire to be great. Instead, he said, hey, if you want to be great, this is how you become great. You must be the slave and servant of all. And this is where he puts everything into perspective, because right after he says this, take a look at what he says. He says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." You see, our culture teaches us today that if you want to be great, you got to find a way to climb to the top. In other words, the path to greatness is to ascend. But for Jesus, the path to greatness was just the opposite. Because as he hung there on that cross and he breathed his last breath, he commended his spirit to the Father. What did he do? He descended into hell. In other words, he became the last and the least and the lowest of all of us. You see, what makes Jesus great is not how he rose to the top, but rather how he stooped to the very bottom, not for himself, but for people like you and me. And so here's the challenge for you and I today. If this is how Jesus defines greatness, then as his followers, we need to make it our mission to tell and to show and to demonstrate to those around us what it means to be great, that our greatness is not defined by what we do for ourselves, but rather what we do for those around us. And so I want to encourage you over these next few weeks, simply slow down for a bit and take some time to serve those around you. Reach out to a family member. Help out a neighbor in need. Reach out to an organization and volunteer with them. Show people what it means to be great in the eyes of our God. Because as Jesus affirms today, that's what makes a GOAT. Hey, as always, thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.